Before we start again, I'll announce anyone who might have just come into the room. We have a speaker list at the front of the table. If you wish to speak, please sign the speaker list before we start. Yes. Okay. Right. Good evening and welcome. We will call the meeting to order of the joint meeting of the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee and the Board of Education Finance Committee for today, Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025, beginning at 6:05 p.m. Before we proceed with the agenda, we would like to call the roll of the two committees, starting with the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee. We have Councilmember Jim Freya present, Councilmember Johan Lopez, Councilmember Ann Winterstrand, and myself, Greg Burnett, the Finance and Claims Committee Chairperson. And I'll now turn it over to Sherry McCready-Pritchett, the Board of Education Finance Committee Chairperson, for their roll call.
Good evening, everyone, and with me tonight, I have Karen Nelson-Bakey and Board Member Diane Carpio. My name is Sherry McCready-Pritchett, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
Thank you, Sherry. We will begin with opening comments from Mayor Harry Rilling and Superintendent Dr. Alex Estrella at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's good to see people coming out on a cold evening to take an interest in the budget process with the City of Norwalk and the Board of Education. It's a process that we go through for several months prior to coming up with the final budget. And I think we all have the same goals, is to provide as much as we can for the services the city needs to provide, as well as trying to keep taxes as low as possible. So again, I thank you for being here, and I'll ask Dr. Estrella to.
Good evening, everyone. As the mayor said, we're really happy to see so many people coming out in this frigid evening. And I'm hoping that we also have a lot of participation remotely as well. This is a great opportunity for us, the BOE, alongside the city, to start our conversations around our path forward and thinking about the resources necessary to do the important work, not only for the city, but for the school system. And in thinking about the work ahead, keeping in mind the why in which we do our work, particularly in the Board of Education, which is to service our children, and the importance of maintaining strong and effective programs across our district to ensure that our students thrive and succeed. Cities are successful when their schools are strong and provide adequate resources for our students to achieve. So I'm excited to be here this evening and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you to both of you for those comments. The joint meeting tonight is one of several opportunities to share information and continue the dialogue so both committees can better understand the operating budget goals, objectives, key drivers, and challenges for the upcoming 2025-2026 fiscal year and budget cycle. It is essential that we understand the priority items as we move forward towards the creation of one City of Norwalk operating budget. Please mark your calendars for Thursday, February 13th, when the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee will host a public hearing beginning at 6:30 p.m. on the operating budget recommendation. The Board of Estimate and Taxation will also hold a public hearing on Wednesday, March 26th, on the tentative operating budget. The public hearing on the capital budget will take place on Thursday, February 6th, hosted by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So again, there'll be several opportunities for additional public input as we continue in the budget cycle for both the operating and capital budget. This evening, we will focus on the operating budget during the joint meeting. The Board of Education has approved their budget requests, and we will hear more this evening related to the key issues impacting the operating budget requests. We will also receive information from the city covering the financial overview and budget outlook. Over the course of the next few weeks, all of the budget input from the city departments as well as the Board of Education will be assessed leading up to Monday, February 10th, when the recommended operating budget will be presented by the Chief Financial Officer, Jared Smith. Our goal is to remain steadfast in ensuring the strong financial posture of the city and minimizing the tax burden on households. And we truly appreciate your input as we progress through this process. At this time, I'll turn it over to Sherry McCready Pritchett for comments from the Board of Ed Finance Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. Good evening, everyone. The purpose of this meeting is to continue the discussion around the FY 25-26 budget. On January 14th, the Norwalk Board of Education approved the superintendent's recommended budget for an increase of 9.7%. At the same time, let me be clear, the city has not made any determinations about the budget as of yet. Norwalk Public Schools has made steady progress over the last 5 years, and that success stems from the board's commitment and mission to provide an excellent and equitable education so that all of Norwalk students will graduate future ready. The development of the budget for the FY 25-26 budget was grounded in a strategic plan. And that progress we have seen is the result of deliberate investment and resources that meet the diverse needs of our students. At the same time, sustaining and building on this success requires continued support and commitment. Moreover, the requested budget addresses contractual obligations, including employee compensation and benefits, rising costs for special education services, out-of-district tuition, transportation and utilities, and the need to return key program funding to the local budget. This budget represents a balanced approach aimed at maintaining the high-quality education and support services that our students, staff, and family rely on. I also want to make it known that relative to communication that was emailed to parents, it is my understanding that that message was intended to encourage parents to advocate for the necessary funding that we believe is essential to our students, and that a reduction in that request would have potential consequences. It was not suggested that the council is cutting the budget. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Sherry. We will now move to item 3 on the agenda, which is public participation. We truly want to hear what the public has to say as it relates to the operating budget. If any member of the public attending virtually wishes to speak, please raise your hand electronically and you will be recognized. You will have 3 minutes to share your comments. Please clearly state your name and address for the record. Those attending in person, please sign the speaker list, and you will also have 3 minutes for your comments. Please again, keep in mind that we will be conducting a public hearing during the month of February as we progress through the budget cycle. For those that are online, we have translation available in Spanish and Haitian Creole. So at this time, Chitsime, if you could read the first 3 names of those people that have signed up here in the room that wish to speak.
John wishes to speak.
Good evening, members of the board. Education and Common Council Finance Committee. Thank you for allowing
Excuse
me.
me, could you state your name and your
Oh, sure.
address? for the record,
My name is
please?
John Richichi, 5 Redwood Road. Thank you for allowing me to opportunity to speak tonight. I'm the proud parent of 2 children who attend Wolf Pit Integrated Arts. I come before you today, not just as a parent, but as someone deeply concerned about how the proposed budget cuts could profoundly impact the quality of education and support that our children receive. Staffing cuts will directly impact the learning and enrichment of all children. Both my children thrive when they feel seen, supported, and encouraged. However, with larger class sizes, this personalized attention becomes nearly impossible. Teachers, no matter how skilled or dedicated, can only do so much when their classrooms are overcrowded. I've seen how my children light up when their teachers take the time to understand their unique learning needs. But I worry that with fewer resources, those opportunities for connection will diminish. The sharing of essential staff, assistant principals, school nurses, math and reading coaches, and counselors also raise serious concerns. These professionals are the backbone of our schools, providing guidance, expertise, and safety that our children rely on. The nurse at Wolf Pit has saved a child's life at school. A shared nurse may not be there in a timely manner during a medical emergency. Children are experiencing record high stress and anxiety in our current world. A shared counselor will not have the capacities to support these children. And without dedicated academic coaches, how can we expect to foster strong skills in critical areas like reading and math? I understand that budgets and balancing finances are complex and that difficult decisions must be made, but I urge you to consider the long-term cost of these cuts. Budget cuts threaten vital academic programs and extracurricular activities that help our children discover their passions and develop into well-rounded individuals. Our children's education is not just an expense, it's investment in the future of our community. When we understand our schools, we are shortchanging not only our children, but also the generations to come. Please, as you deliberate, think of the faces behind the numbers. Think of children like mine who deserve the chance to learn and grow in an environment when they feel supported
30 seconds.
and valued. Let's work together to ensure that every child in our district has the resources they need to succeed. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Amanda Trimboli.
Hello, members of the board, Common Council, and Mayor Rilling. My name is Amanda Trimboli, and I live at 12 Cider Lane. I'm speaking tonight in regards to, well, not the capital budget anymore, because that's another meeting for another day, but the operational budget request for NPS, and it was specifically for Wolf Pit Integrated Arts School. In regards to the operational budget, I fully understand that 9.7% is a huge ask from the BOE. And as a taxpayer in the city, it makes me cringe a little bit. However, I'm also a parent in this district, and I fully realize what's at stake if the budget isn't approved. While I'm not naive to the fact that you won't approve it as a whole, I encourage you to approve as much as you can so we don't have to get rid of the very important people and programs in our buildings. Our class sizes cannot afford to get any bigger than they are. There is absolutely zero way that we can share nurses and assistant principals across schools. Our coaches, interventionists, paraeducators, parent coordinators, and counselors are an integral part of the function of the school day. Our special needs population is the highest it's ever been and growing, and makes up about 2/3 of the student population in the district. I'm also a substitute teacher in my children's school, so I see what happens on a day-to-day basis, and I fully understand why all these needs are non-negotiable. What are your plans as a city to help the school district while also not raising taxes? Have you maybe even considered working closely with the BOE on how to solve these problems? I know that you haven't much in the past, but maybe it's time you do. Have you thought about dipping into the city's rainy day fund? I recently read an article that stated there's about $86 million in the rainy day fund, and only 20% of that could solve the problems that the school district faces. This is all our taxpayer money sitting in that fund. And I'll tell you one thing, it's been raining for a really long time. I know you all have some hard decisions to make, and I don't envy any of your jobs. But it's time you start truly listening to our concerns, and it's time that you start working together to come up with solutions for the issues that your citizens and parents of the school district are putting forth. Our children's education cannot be in the crossfire of this decision-making process, so please do not let them down. At the end of the day, your constituents voted you in your seats to work for the best interest of our community. The next election will be an important one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute and for your dedication to Norwalk and to education in Norwalk. I am Mary Jordan, 9 Mott Avenue, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Norwalk Federation of Teachers. We understand budget decisions are still in process. NPS communications about potential scenarios of budget cuts to school nurses, music, counselors, middle school sports, and other critical areas have understandably caused great concern among our members. While these scenarios aim to highlight potential impacts and decisions have not been made, we believe a more balanced approach is possible. We advocate prioritizing school-based budgets, minimizing central office costs, and protecting students and employees from unnecessary hardships. Our review found the potential for $1 million of cuts to items that could be considered luxuries in other districts, such as school quality review, private consultants, catered meetings, expansion of international baccalaureate programs in Montessori. Central office departments that have grown could be cut, such as human resources and communications. Other expenses to consider include catered meetings, travel, convocation, and branded cash gift card programs. Reallocating funds like these could spare essential positions like counselors, nurses, and assistant principals, as well as protect, and preserve vital programs like music and sports. Norwalk has demonstrated a commitment to education, with annual funding increases of 3 to 5% and investment in 2 new schools being built. We appreciate the city's ongoing support. We urge careful consideration of cuts like these to maintain the excellence that our students deserve. Thank you again for your time and your leadership.
Thank you. We will now go, did you go? We'll take one more person, in the room, and then we'll look to see, if anyone online has their hand raised virtually.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Janderko, and I'm the Vice President of the Norwalk Federation of Teachers. I am here representing again the Norwalk Federation of Teachers, and we appreciate your ongoing efforts to support education in Norwalk and the openness to feedback. We advocate prioritizing the school budgets, minimizing central office costs, and protecting students and employees from unnecessary hardships. With that in mind, we have some questions and comments about areas of spending that may warrant some closer scrutiny. Number 1, the International Baccalaureate Program. What is spent on the IB program, including fees, training, stipends, consultants, and resources like software and materials. While the diploma program at Brian McMahon High School shows clear benefits, the value of an expansion is a little less clear. Second, food and meeting expenses. How much is spent on catered meals, rented facilities, and other food-related costs for NPS meetings? To protect vital programs, we're willing to scale back and brown bag it. Number 3, the school quality reviews. School quality review lead earns over $200,000, with additional costs for external readers and extensive preparation time for NPS staff. Many agree this process is a distraction and a disruption with limited benefits. Number 4, our communications department. Salaries for the communication team total $356,395,000. In 2017 and 18, that was managed by one person, earning only $112,000. Is this current level of spending necessary? Number 5, travel costs. The travel budget has grown from $122,000 in 2017 and 18 to $355,000. How essentials are these expenditures? Number 6, convocation. This year's convocation included significant expenses for the speaker, rented equipment, and promotional items. We like the outdoor setting, but could this event be delivered in a more cost-effective manner? Number 7, security and staffing. A second district-wide security officer position was recently posted at a salary of $142,431. Is this addition necessary? Similarly, HR staffing remains at 9, even as benefits specialists have been moved out of the department. Number 8, consultants. How much is being spent on consultants for initiatives like Equity, IB, Montessori, MLL services, and retreats? A breakdown would be helpful to clarify these priorities. And finally, number 9, the Montessori classrooms. We have invested and should keep what we have, but careful scrutiny to the expansion is warranted. These are not criticisms of individuals in these roles, but rather a call for thoughtful considerations about spending in the areas they're seen as luxuries. We urge a focus on protecting students and frontline staff, avoiding larger class sizes, and preserving roles like parent coordinators, assistant principals, and others who directly impact our families and students. Thank you for your time and listening to our concerns.
Thank you. Do we have anyone? Yes.
Our first speaker is going to be Lisa Britton.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Lisa Britton, 19 Sherfield Park, Independent Party Town Chair, and proud mother of 2 NPS graduates, class of 15 and class of 17, and 20-year alumnus to the NPS budget fights. And I probably will upset everybody here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak. It's time for both the superintendent and mayor to be honest with parents and taxpayers about the school budget. The scare tactic of directing parents to write the council is misdirected. If anyone participating in the charter revision meetings, you'd know that the council does not control line items in the budget. Education is a line item and the BET does that. But Norwalk's inability to keep up with the Board of Ed spending is due to a host of factors. And so for the Board of Ed to be asking for almost a 10% increase, when according to their slides, the 2024 enrollment is down 152 students from 2019 and forecasted to be down by 301 next fall, begs further scrutiny. If this is a bare bones budget, I apologize for that. If this is a bare bones budget, geez, can you give me a second? Well, I can't, I'm in my office, I apologize. Yeah, I disconnected it, apologies for that. If this is a bare bones budget, then the superintendent and mayor should be in Hartford declaring a financial emergency and instructing parents to write Bob Duff and the governor demanding immediate state funds to address the disproportionate impact that immigration has had on our schools as outlined in their presentation, showing Norwalk's percentage of multi-language students approaching 25% when the state is 10%. Or Dr. Estrella should have been directing parents to write Norwalk's P&Z, demanding a stop to the years of state-driven property tax abatements for mall, the apartments, and that all deny Norwalk the needed revenue that we need for running our schools. Or the poor building records of illegal multifamily houses where landlords cheat the tax rolls. Need I remind everyone of the 5-year phase-in that's needed to soften the blow of the 2023 reval due to the drop in commercial properties and shifted burden to residential property owners. When the superintendent joined this district, she'll recall Mike Barbas and I pointing out that Norwalk was not New York City, that Norwalk's budget issues would not go away due to the items I previously mentioned, and that she needed to address it. Instead, she, like the mayor, continued to kick the financial can down the road, expecting taxpayers to pick up the slack. The mayor with our land use policies and the superintendent hiring permanent staff off of temporary COVID money or building the Welcome Center. As someone with 2 years who proudly graduated from Norwalk schools, a member of the PTA who spent 15 years fundraising, and 7-year member of Norwalk's data-driven district management team, serving with Dr. Moore, I think I saw Ralph Valancisi there in the audience.
30
under
seconds,
Left
please.
Behind. Yeah, I'll close up. Where we successfully worked to raise reading and math scores to close the achievement gap. I am distraught to see 10 years later the lowering of standards where 60% is considered a passing grade, yet the financial price tag to deliver those substandard results has well surpassed inflation or any reasonable budget request. I'm very sorry, but I think all of you guys have got a lot more work to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I apologize for
We'll go to the next person online.
Our next speaker on the list is Will Hennessy.
Hello, my name is Will Hennessy at 26 Pheasant Lane. I largely want to speak on the same items that have been addressed. I'm a parent of a child at the Wolf Pit Public Schools. A real world specific that I'd like to share that would drastically be affected by the cuts that we're talking about. My daughter has a severe nut allergy. This afternoon, we received a phone call from the nurse. Her teacher noticed that she had a hive on her forehead. The nurse was able to bring her into the office, figure out this is just sort of a viral reaction because she's fighting off a cold, put some Benadryl ointment on it, sent her on her way. The cuts that we're talking about, larger class size. The teacher may not have noticed a tiny hive on a kindergartner's forehead. She goes to the nurse. The nurse isn't there. My wife or I are going to be called to pick her up because obviously we're not having a child with an allergic reaction sitting in school. It's going to come on to us to pick her up and get her looked at. And if we're living in a world where she's actually having a reaction and anaphylaxis, I cringe to think what could actually happen. And if we're talking about saving money, I would posit that the liability from a school district knowing that a nut allergy is probably the least of the medical concerns of many of the students in our district, should something go wrong, is immense. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person on the list.
The next person's listed as a guest, so we'll ask them to announce their name first.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Amanda Frazier, and I live at 23 Sachem Street. I'm a proud mother of a wonderful child at Kendall College and Career Academy. Thank you for the time today. I did want to address some of the proposed possible cuts based on whether or not we approve the budget going forward. As a parent, I imagine larger class sizes forcing teachers to spend, a lot more time managing the class and less amount of time being able to dedicate one-on-one to their students, struggling to provide that individual support that every child really needs. This isn't just a strain on our amazing NPS teachers who are so passionate and amazing and engaging. It also compromises the quality of education. Our children deserve better than that, and they deserve better than to be lost in a crowd. I also consider the role of assistant principals. These leaders are the backbone of our schools, ensuring everything runs smoothly and providing critical support to both staff and students. If they're required to split their time between multiple buildings, their ability to lead and support is severely diminished. Our schools need strong, consistent leadership to thrive. And the biggest issue that I see is the possibility of splitting up school nurses. These professionals are essential to the health and well-being of our students. Sharing nurses between schools means that children may not receive timely medical attention when they need it most. This isn't just about convenience, it's about safeguarding the health and safety of our children. As someone who works for a health nonprofit, I know how important it is to have prompt medical attention in an emergency. Minutes could be the difference between life and death outcomes. By approving the school budget or approving as close as you can get, we can address these challenges head on. We can ensure smaller class sizes, dedicated assistant principals, full-time school nurses. And this is an investment in our children's future, in their education, and in their well-being. Let's come together to make this a reality. Our children are counting on us. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for your comments. We'll go to, the next two individuals that are in the room.
Elise Williams at 24 Mid-Rock Drive.
Can you hear me okay? Good evening, members of the board, Common Council, and Mayor Reiling. My name is Elise Williams, and I live at 24 Mid-Rocks Drive. I have a daughter, Raylan, who's a first grader at Wolf Pit Elementary School, and a son who is in preschool at NECC. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. I would like to discuss two important areas tonight, the capital budget and the operational budget. First, regarding the capital budget, I've been consistently impressed with the dedication and the hard work of the staff and the community at Wolf Pit. They go above and beyond to support my daughter and all the students. However, the school building itself is in need of significant upgrades and has been overdue for some time. One major concern is the lack of adequate air conditioning. With the increasing number of warm days, the school has had to close early or shut down entirely due to uncomfortable conditions. This disrupts learning and negatively affects the well-being of both the students and the staff. We are asking for your support in approving the asbestos abatement and installation of proper HVAC system, which together will provide the school with much-needed air conditioning. These upgrades are essential to providing a safe and comfortable learning environment, and they will also help extend the life of the building. I understand these projects are already included in the capital budget. Sorry, we're not talking about it tonight, and I urge you to approve them so we can proceed. Secondly, regarding the operational budget, I understand that making tough decisions is part of your responsibility, and I recognize that raising taxes is just not an easy decision. However, further cuts to the education budget would have detrimental impacts on our students and on the district as a whole. The rising costs of special education, grants phasing out this year, specialized needs, transportation costs going up, food services, and the increasing student population from some of the apartment buildings, is my understanding, has put a strain on the instructional coaches, strain on the budget. While we recognize the challenges, cutting essential positions such as full-time nursing staff, instructional coaches, and assistant principals would create chaos in the schools and deepen the educational burden for our children, educational gaps for our children. I urge you to approve the operational budget to as close as full as possible to ensure that these vital positions, programs, support systems will remain intact. Let's keep our community together and keep progressing our children in the right direction to succeed. Thank you so much for your time and your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Next person here, Council Chambers.
Andrea Di Gaetano at 20 Murray Street.
And as the speaker comes forward, just let the record show that Councilmember Heather Dunn has joined the meeting. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Heather. Welcome. My name is Andrea Di Gaetano. I live at 20 Murray Street. I'm here tonight to speak regarding the capital and operational budget request for NPS, specifically for Wolf Pit Integrated Art School, where my two children both are students, 4th grade and preschool. The capital budget seems like a no-brainer, so I have a quick statement on that. The proposed improvements, which were approved by the BOE for Wolf Pit, are absolutely essential to ensuring a functioning facility for our children and our educators. The classrooms are absolutely unbearable as the weather gets warmer. Having our teaching days interrupted or even canceled because of warm weather is unacceptable. The asbestos abatement and HVAC install is necessary to give our building, which is clearly at its end of life, a much-needed dose of life support until this city fits into their timeline and budget a new building for Wolf Pit. It's not a permanent solution, but it's a worthy temporary one, and one that I urge you to approve in full. On to the operational budget, which is not as cut and dry. As a taxpayer, a 9.7% proposed budget increase makes me angry. What makes me even angrier are the threats of what could be at stake if this exorbitant budget increase is not approved. Bigger class sizes, part-time nurses, shared assistant principals with 10-month terms, removing coaches, interventionists, paras, counselors. None of these positions are expendable, and it shouldn't even be a consideration to eliminate even one of those jobs. Our high needs population continues to grow. Will the solution continue to be to shift these students outside of our district to a district or school which can handle them, which we will then foot the bill for? Won't those instances increase if we eliminate the very positions which exist to support those students? Don't we live in a district which prides itself on our diversity and inclusion? Isn't eliminating these positions going to have the opposite effect? However, we're here now in this unpleasant situation which we all must deal with. And I know it is highly unlikely that a 9.7% budget increase will be approved. But I urge you all to fund the budget as much as you can in excess of the percentage which you funded in the past in order to keep these vital positions in our schools. Our children need this. Cutting these positions is not an option. And if they are cut, there will be feet held to the proverbial fire. So whatever you all need to do to make nice with each other and figure this out, please do so. Because we, the people, the voters, the taxpayers, intend on holding all of our elected officials accountable. We're trusting you to do the right thing. So please don't let us down, but more importantly, please don't let our children down.
Thank you for your comments. Next person in the room?
Louis Garcia at 15 Bond Street.
Okay, let's go online.
Our next person online and our last is Lisa Henderson.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, thank you. Lisa Henderson, 21 Apple Tree Lane. Thank you for allowing us to speak tonight. And I want to thank Lisa Britton for her accurate testimony. While I sympathize with the current parents, we've been there with the same issues and scare tactics with a lot less ask. A 9.7% increase ask from the Board of E is unacceptable and unaffordable to the taxpayers of Norwalk. Our taxes will already increase prior to any additional budget increase due to the phase in reassessment. The budget issues aren't a new problem. I've had 4 children graduate from Norwalk Public Schools, and we've had to live through years of tightening the belt. The same will have to be the case now. Taxpayers are paying attention during this election year. Please keep our taxes low. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Do you have anyone else online that has a hand raised?
Diana's iPhone.
Diana's iPhone.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Diana Palladino, Christopher, 1 Naples Street. I'm a mom of 3 kids, one currently attending NACC, which is sadly closing in June due to space issues, a 5th grader at Marvin Elementary, and a 6th grader through middle school choice at Ponus STEAM. I truly hope the proposed budget cuts are reconsidered, as Norwalk students deserve the best. Cuts to critical positions like nursing and instructional coaches will inevitably create gaps in the quality of our education for our students. And I fear of the long-term effects with larger class sizes, that the students will not get the services that they need. Our kids are truly our future, and our future is an investment. And it is our responsibility to protect our community by ensuring that the budget needs are met. Larger class sizes and fewer paras are deeply concerning, as they directly impact the classroom experience and the ability of educators to meet each child's needs. No one wants to see taxes raised, but we also don't want to see parents, students, and teachers struggling and people leaving Norwalk because we cannot fulfill basic educational needs. I urge everyone involved to prioritize, to ensure that we prioritize spending first and foremost, and that we find a way to maintain the resources necessary and try to come as close as we can to fulfill the needs of the students. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Do we have anyone else in the room that wishes to speak? Going once? Anyone? And we have no one else online? Okay, very good. All right, with that, we thank everyone who has taken the time to prepare comments and share those with us this evening. The council has also received several emails that we have reviewed each and every one of them. So again, we truly appreciate your input. So at this time, we will close public participation and move forward with the agenda with presentations from the city Chief Financial Officer Jared Smith, followed by the presentation from the Board of Education CFO Linda Esmana.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen so that everyone can see the very brief presentation that I'm going to give. All right. Okay, thank you again. The city is scheduled to deliver its budget in the next few weeks, as Greg mentioned. And so anything that I mentioned tonight, this is meant to be an overview for you and a preview of what's to come, and kind of give you a backdrop for the budget that we're putting together now. So none of this is set in stone. It's to give you a sense of where the city stands at this time. And I'm going to start with an overview of the economic situation and some things going on around the country, and also within the state and outside of the city, and just to give you that backdrop. Inflation is not what it used to be. We're not seeing the same types of increases. The impact on the budget is not expected to be as dramatic. So we don't see this as being a large impact on the budget. Inflation has slowed down quite a bit. Interest rates can have an impact, and it can impact both sides of the budget. As you all may know, we issue bonds pretty much every year, and those interest rates, the Federal Reserve rates, will have an impact on the rate that we get when we issue bonds for schools, for roads, and other infrastructure and other equipment projects that we do each year. In addition, we also, the city has cash, and we invest that cash when it's not being used for other purposes, and we receive interest on that money, which helps to offset taxes. And so to the extent that those rates change, that will impact that revenue as well. The housing market is slowing. Stock market has been strong, and anticipating that it will grow over the next year or so. Another unknown is there was the inauguration the other day, and we have a new administration, new president, and when you read the news, you see a lot of stories, and there's a lot of speculation and chatter about what's going to happen, and so a lot of that remains to be seen. It's difficult for us to plan around what may or may not happen because there are no real concrete proposals or it's not known what's going to happen to those proposals when they get into Congress. In February, I believe shortly before we publish the city's budget, the governor will be presenting the state budget. That will have some concrete proposals in it. In particular, we receive grants from the state, and so we will be paying attention to what the governor is proposing and how his proposals for changes in those grants affect what we have assumed in our budget when it's completed. And then the next two pieces of this slide are just to give you some background on the job situation nationally and within the state, and some highlights of layoffs that are going on. Every year, we're required to produce a financial report, a comprehensive annual financial report. And so this is something that we worked for months on, and I have to give credit to Chitsime, our comptroller, for working closely with our external auditor to produce this. It takes months and months of a lot of work, and appreciate Chitsume's work on that. So I'm just going to go through a few highlights of that. The long-term liabilities, we talk a lot, especially when we're going through the capital budget, about the debt, which is a subset of those long-term liabilities. In addition to that, we have pension and OPEB, or a couple of the other large portions of our liabilities. So those liabilities increased by 2.8% to $615 million. This is a fairly modest growth there. Pension ADEC, the ADEC is the required amount that the city is required to contribute to the pension fund in order to keep up with any growth there. And so we have actuaries that work for us, and they let us know how much we need to contribute each year. And the city has done a good job of contributing 100% and continued to do that last year during that year. With those funds that get contributed to the pension and also to OPEB, which is really retirement health care, those funds get invested. And here you can see the returns on those investments. They were pretty solid, and in keeping with the previous slide and what we saw in the stock market. Those funds do get invested in stocks and other investments, other types of investments. 11.4% of our pension fund and 14.2% return on the OPEB funds. We're more limited with regard to operating cash that I mentioned from the previous slide. We did see an increase last year of $4.6 million over the budgeted amount. We think we've kind of peaked with regard to the returns that we're going to receive on those cash investments, and we'll probably see that to start tapering off in the next 12 to 18 months. The fund balance, which was mentioned by one of the public speakers, did increase by $8.7 million to $86 million. This is the unassigned portion of the fund balance. We spent $8.6 million of the total ARPA funds that we received. These are federal funds that we received, which was the total amount was $39 million, and we have a number of years suspended out through the end of 2026. In addition, we just reached a landmark at the end of this past year, December 31st, where we had to have all the funds committed which means we had to have contracts in place for all of the money, which we did. So that was a big step for us, and thankfully we were able to have all that funding committed by before that deadline. And so now we have approximately 2 years left to actually spend the money. It's pretty typical. The property tax revenue accounted for just over 80% of all revenues. We are heavily reliant on property tax revenue. It's obviously our very largest source of revenue. Kind of balancing the fund balance, we also have an internal service fund, which is where we pay our insurance, a lot of our insurance bills, whether it's healthcare or it could be legal liabilities, settlements, things like that that we pay for. That we saw a reduction in that fund of $4.9 million. We're anticipating that there will be a further reduction to that by the end of this year as well. So that's something that we're keeping our eye on and looking to probably increase the funding in next year's budget to limit those losses and those reductions in that fund. All right, let's move on to directly about having to do with the 26 budget. We have a number of challenges that we're facing, and you've heard these, some of these over and over again, in particular, the real estate revaluation phase in. We saw that residential real estate increased a lot when we did this revaluation in 2023. We had the city had the option to phase in that increase so that residential taxpayers don't get hit with those bills immediately, because that would have been those would have been dramatic increases in a single year. Nevertheless, we are phasing it in, and there will be a significant increase again in next year as part of next year's budget. So that, in combination with the preliminary department requests, including the, as has been mentioned, the Board of Ed's proposed increase of 9.7%. If those were to hold, if the preliminary department requests were to hold, we may see residents may see for the median household their taxes increase by up to 20%. So the tax increase would increase by 20%. I know that the schools are continuing to look at their budget. We haven't, the city hasn't reduced its budget yet. We're obviously continuing to look at ours for ways to mitigate against those increases. And that work will continue over the next few months throughout the budget process. We have a couple of state mandated changes to the motor vehicle tax revenue that are also impacting us. There was a change that requires us to reduce the motor vehicle mill rate so that it is at least as low as the lowest real estate rate. And to give you a sense of what that means, it means that the motor vehicle rate would go from what it is now, which is about 32.5 mils, would go down to somewhere in the low 20s. What that means is that we would lose approximately $10 million in revenue, which would have to get made up in some form. Again, this is a mandate by the state and something that's out of our control. A second change that was made with regard to the valuation of motor vehicles, it used to be a reliance on the Blue Book value of motor vehicles to determine how much each vehicle is worth, and then applying the mill rate to those vehicles. that methodology is being changed, also for the state. So now it's just gonna be, you take the MSRP of your vehicle, whatever it was on the date that the vehicle was newly purchased, and there will be a declining, a depreciation in the value of the vehicle at a set amount. I believe it starts at 85% and then decreases by 5% a year. We've run some preliminary numbers on that, and we believe at this point that the value of that is going to be a loss of $2 million in tax revenue, again, to be made up somewhere else. Talked about the Board of Education budget increase of 9.7%, which is equal to about 22.6 million. And I do want to take a moment to thank my counterpart, Linda, and the CFO for the schools for his work, because you know, when we've gotten some previews of their budget, and I did submit several questions to them for responses. This is my first time in this budget cycle, and you know, so it's been a lot for me to get up to speed, taking in what's happening in the city, and then also with what's going on with the Board of Education. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate their cooperation. We have, I believe there are 6 collective bargaining agreements that expired on July 1st of 2024. Those are still being negotiated. This creates a little bit of unpredictability for us. We have set aside funding for those agreements to be settled. What we're seeing right now in other towns are increases in salaries of between 2.5% and 3%. Just to give you a sense of what's happening around the state, and what we might expect within them. This year, we conducted a experience study in the pension fund, which I mentioned. And what this means is that our actuaries go back in time over the last 4 or 5 years, and they look at some of the things that they assume in doing their calculation of how much the city needs to contribute to the pension fund. And they look at a lot of those assumptions to see how far off they may have been, and recommend other changes to those assumptions going forward. The result is that our pension ADEC, our pension contribution, is going to increase fairly significantly. And so that's going to be something that also is going to drive this budget and our budget increases. The good news is on that front, because we're catching up in those assumptions, we believe are going to be made more accurate. Going forward, there'll be a lot more predictability, and we shouldn't see large swings in our contributions from one year to the next into the pension fund. Last slide. Just talked about the pension fund. Unfortunately, the city has done tremendous. It's actually amazing, the contributions and the commitment to funding its OPEB funds, the retiree healthcare fund, to the point where it's more than fully funded. And what this means for us is that we will see reductions in the amount that we have to contribute to that fund in the future. And so those reductions will help to offset any increases that we see in the pension fund. We're obviously in this process, and over the next few weeks, over the last few months, we've been looking at different ways to control spending, and with the goal of keeping the city budget to between 2% and 2.5%. And we recognize the burden that taxpayers are going to have to bear as a result of the reval and some other things that are outside of our control. The budget is within our control, and we, as I said, are trying to control that as much as possible. And as part of that, we'll obviously be looking to at areas where we can reduce spending in other areas to prioritize spending with the goal of finding that balance between continuing to provide the services that are important to the residents of the city and doing so at the lowest cost and keeping taxes down. That's the end of my presentation, and I appreciate your attention and your engagement in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. And now we'll turn the pass the baton to Chief Financial Officer Bill Smarty.
Thank you. Jared, if you could stop the screen share.
Absolutely.
Thank you again. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. Thank you to members of the public who participated in the session. Thank you to Chair Burnett and Chairman McCready Pritchett for your partnership and leadership as well. And a special thank you to the BOE budget team. As you mentioned, as you know, we started this process much earlier than the city did, and there's a lot of work that has already gone into place. And again, thank you, Jared, for your overview of the presentation. I also understand your challenges having been in your shoes. So thank you for that. But first of all, I want to kind of start talking by giving an overview of who we serve, our why. We are in the service of children. And I wanted to begin by, first of all, kind of sharing our demographic and enrollment numbers. So as you can see from this chart, as has been mentioned, we do have, on the Board of Ed side at least, a relatively steady enrollment number. So you'll see that going back to October 2018, this chart includes an updated count as of December 1. We do a census on the 1st of every month, showing you what our overall population has been district-wide. However, I think what's critical in this chart is to see that in the enrollment chart, there is the yellow shaded portion of enrollment, and that is our high need student within the district. And by high needs, we mean students who fall in one of these categories: multilingual learners, specialized learners, and students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So whereas you could see that the overall enrollment has stayed flat, but since 2019 to this day, our high needs population has increased by 29%. And the significance of that is we all know that the resources necessary to provide access to all students exponentially increases when you factor in the high need students. So I think that provides some perspective. And I think also just taking into account, not just on the Board of Ed side, but even our city operations, municipal operations side, it's not accurate to compare the population growth or the citizenship growth or the enrollment growth to the rate of growth of the budget. Because, for example, if you look at our city's population during the same period, the city has only grown 4%. But it's not realistic to expect that the city's expenses would also grow 4%. Police, fire, all of these other services, Parks and Rec, they do not grow at the rate of the population because there are many factors that influence expenses beyond those who we serve. We talk about salaries and payroll, utilities, cost of providing services. So I think it is important to recognize the respective populations and enrollments, but I think it's inaccurate to use that as a proxy for what the respective expenditure should be on both sides, both on the Board of Ed and on the city side. In terms of looking at our MLL and SPED trends, this is again looking at that same population. The first chart compares what our MLL counts have been, going back again to 2017. You'll see a steady increase in the total number of students that are MLL. The line going through those bars, the one below, is looking at the state average MLL across the state. And so you could also see that that is also showing a steady increase, which reflects some of the population trends within the state. The blue line shows our MLL population as a percentage of the total enrollment. And so you can see that both of those lines are also growing over time, but our MLL population obviously is at a higher rate as a percentage of our enrollment compared to the state. And the chart next to it, again, looks at similar information. This chart is looking at our specialized learners, what we refer to as the prevalence rate. So again, you see that in raw numbers, that is also growing. But if you look at the percentage of our students that have been identified as needing specialized services, that has grown. This chart also shows a comparison with the state level and with the Norwalk Public Schools level. On this chart, you see that actually at the state level, the prevalence rate for specialized learners is actually higher than what we experience here in Norwalk. So even though the Norwalk rate is growing, but it is actually growing at a lower rate than at the state level. But in both of these charts, the trends are consistent with what's happening across the state and in fact across the country. Then I think it's been mentioned, it's important to also talk about who provides our services. We all know that both the city and the Board of Ed, we are in the people business. Most of our services are provided by individuals. This is a staffing distribution of the Norwalk Public Schools. As has been mentioned, we do have positions that are funded locally, and we also have positions that are funded by grants. So if you look at, I'll start with the locally funded positions, the tentative approved budget that was approved by the Board of Ed, we have a little over 1,700 locally funded positions. This is where these positions reside. As you can see, as you would expect, most of our people work in elementary schools, followed by the high schools, followed by the middle schools. In addition, there are support services for these individuals that are not housed within the respective schools. They are housed in this building on this floor, including instructional support, facilities, transportation. These are all support services for our students and for the staff who support our students. And then you have finance and HR and IT folks. But in looking at this chart, you will see that 97% of our employees work directly in support of our schools, whether they are in the schools or on this floor supporting our schools. And therefore, when we talk about positions and reductions, it is challenging for us. How do you make those decisions given the staffing? It's really difficult to expect that you can balance the budget or you can shift positions by only impacting 3% of the total staffing. And that's part of the challenge that we face in moving this budget forward. We do have about 187 positions that are funded by grants. And again, the spatial distribution is also the same. Even the grant funded positions are in elementary, middle schools, and our instruction support areas. As you saw before, we have explained that we were fortunate to have received some grants over the past couple of years. These grants are being phased out. On the Board of Ed, we acknowledge that, and we do have a number of grants this year. Even with the ask that we have actually had to discontinue. These were programs that were previously funded by ARPA grants, behavioral health grants, specifically, that we partnered with others in the community to provide these services. So here's a list of those programs. One is we had about $700,000 worth of grant funding that we partnered with Mid-Fairfield Counseling Services to provide counseling services to students with intensive needs. This was a program that we had that we're discontinuing it because the funding has gone away and we have not been able to accommodate this in the local budget, even with the current approved ask. We were fortunate to have received $461,000 in grants. This year, we were able to dedicate that towards materials for literacy. Dibbles and Wonders, these are curriculum programs, and these would have been items that we would have funded through the capital budget. But because of this grant, we were able to actually reduce our capital budget request and fund these funds through the grants. We had a middle school summer program and high dosage after school program of 278,000. This program also covered transportation costs for students to get to these programs during the summer. That is an element that we have also discontinued and is not part of this ongoing budget because that funding has gone away. We had planned expansion of our Future Ready program, which provides alternative opportunities for our students to complete their education. We had about 308,000 designated for that. With the expiration of this grant, we weren't able to fit this in the local budget, and therefore, at this time, although continuing the Future Ready program, but we have postponed any plans for that program's expansion. We were fortunate to also receive Priority Schools Faith Act grants worth over 180,000. We used this funding last year to provide therapeutic services. Again, this is a portion that we've actually not included in this budget because that program has gone away. We were able to provide dual credit expansion through a dual expansion credit grant. This covered our IB programs and our AP after school tutoring in our high schools. For our students, with the expiration of that grant, this program is not included in our local budget. We had one counselor serving each of our high school 1 day per week, doing drug and alcohol counseling through Positive Directions. With this program going away, we have discontinued this program. And then we also had a K-12 district-wide social worker that resided here in central office, but their role was to lead our behavioral health initiatives and also provide student support services with students in the schools, working directly with our counselors and social workers in the schools, students, teachers and principals to just provide additional services for our students. But again, with the expiration of that grant and the inability to accommodate this in the local budget, these are programs that we are discontinuing moving forward into the new fiscal year. It was mentioned about the role of central office and how can we balance the budget and moving forward. Within the current budget that's being presented and approved by the board, we have started taking action by reorganizing the central office. There are a total of 21 positions in total that were reduced and reorganized. Within those 21, we did restructure and reorganize positions. And so there are 7 positions that are being reorganized. But currently, the net reduction at this point is about 14 positions, basically the 21 minus the 7, for a total reduction of $2.1 million. So that has already happened and is part of the budget that's being presented in front of you. We are also evaluating to get to the 9.7, an additional $1 million worth of reductions. These cuts we're carefully reviewing those in order to minimize the impact to student services. And therefore, even with these reductions, we will be looking at minimizing the impact to our schools. So this is just somewhat of an example of what it took us to get to the request that the Board of Ed has approved. We do recognize we still have a long way to go, but I thought it was important to share with you some of the work that has already taken place. I'm going to briefly start talking about some of the drivers and how we got to the request that we've had. So health insurance continues to be a big driver for us. Our local budget currently, about 14% of our budget is dedicated towards our employee-based, employer-sponsored health insurance. So currently we're under 2 plans, and I'll talk about those 2 plans, but this is specifically for the Connecticut partnership, which is the Connecticut Healthcare Plan, which is the same plan that the majority of the city employees are on. We were on a call yesterday, actually, to get this most recent update. So these numbers are hot off the press. The way that the state plan manages their health insurance is they begin first by grouping the state in various counties. And what they do, they call it a regional adjustment. So this basically takes into account the cost of services within those regions. So Fairfield County, which is where we reside, based on their calculations, we have a regional adjustment of 1%, which means whatever the base rate that's calculated, you add an additional 1% if you live in Fairfield County. If you live in Wyndham, it's actually 3% below that average. So whatever base amount is, you add them. The new methodology is that these rates are good for 2 years, the adjustment. So the 1% adjustment for this year will also carry into FY 27. As of yesterday was when they gave us the adjustment, they're telling us to budget between 10 to 12% increase for the state plan. So us in Fairfield County of North Public Schools, so it's 10 to 12% plus the 1% for being in Fairfield County. So that is a factor in doing that. And based on claims history, they look at things like projected trends, primary care initiatives, fees and prescription rebates, and that's how they determine them. So the budget that we had put together was actually based on the estimate that they gave us in November. At that time, they told us to plan for 8 to 10%. Yesterday, they told us 10 to 12%. The final update will be in March, and we will know for sure what that rate will actually end up being. So these are their preliminary numbers as of yesterday. How does that translate into actual numbers? Well, we, the city in general, both the Board of Ed and the city side, we have Siegel. They are our health insurance consultants. So they are the experts that provide us guidance. They look at our claims history and they negotiate the best deals for us. So these are their estimates for the Board of Ed specifically. And I had asked them to update this one based on the numbers that we heard yesterday. So I got these numbers this afternoon. So again, you're looking at this chart. I mentioned earlier that the teachers went to a different plan last year. So the 2025, the teachers premium, the Cigna plan, they are estimating by this year, we will spend about 24.8 million in total. For next year, they are projecting a 15% increase. We haven't yet heard what that final number from Cigna will be, but 15% is what the increase was last year from Cigna for this term. And so this is what they're projecting now. The partnership plan is the plan that the rest of us are on. We also have a dental and vision plan, and then we also have other fees associated with these plans. And so you add all of that together, you're looking at $49.7 million in health insurance cost out the gate. Now, we do have a cost share with our employees. Roughly, the Board of Ed pays 80% of these expenses. Our employees pay about 20%. It varies slightly between the unions, but on average, it's an 80-20 split. So whatever you see here, the board will be responsible for about 80%, with employees picking up about 20%, with slight variations. There are things on here that the employee does not pick up just based on collective bargaining, and we offer life insurance, employee assistance programs. These are picked up by the board and not shared with the employees. So that kind of gives you a sense of how some of these numbers are kind of outside of our control because they're contractual, and we have partners that deal with it. So separate from that, I do want to talk about what some of the drivers are, the other drivers for this budget. As was mentioned, we do have contracts. This budget includes a $6.6 million wage adjustments across the district, across the unions. This is roughly 2.8% increase year over year, just to meet our contractual obligations. Included in this budget, however, there are some additional positions. We have almost 9.5 FTE teachers, paraeducators, and physical and occupational therapists. These positions are mandated based on the needs of our students. They are outside of our control. The paraeducators support our special education students, so do the physical and the occupational therapists as well. The additional teachers, those are in order to comply with our collective bargaining class sizes. And therefore, when classes get to a certain amount, we are mandated to increase the number of teachers to support those students. Employee health insurance, I kind of explained that briefly, so I'm going to skip over that, but roughly that's probably going to cost us about $5.8 million or so at this point, which is about 2.5% of the overall budget to meet that. I shared earlier that there were some grant programs that have been phased out that we did not include in the operating budget. There are, however, some grant programs that we did roll into our operating budget just because of the nature of services that they provided. So we have about $2.4 million worth of grants. These funded bed services, summer programs, and some security services that we would not be able to eliminate these programs based on the services that they provide. So these are included within the base budget. Last year, we were fortunate. The city received $5 million worth of ARPA grants from the state through the federal government. Of the $5 million, $1.8 million was appropriated to the Board of Education. This allowed us last year to close the gap. And this funding came in, actually, I think it was even after the BET had approved the budget, and we were working on the process, on the plan of reconciling the budget. And therefore, this $1.8 million that the Board of Ed received allowed us to kind of reduce the amount of cuts that we had to include in that year. This budget does include carrying over these programs because these programs are needed. And had it not been for the ARPA grants, we would have been in serious trouble, but they're included in the budget. Specialized needs, we've talked about this quite often. I shared at the very beginning of prevalence rates. We are at 14% prevalence rate. $1.4 million is included in this just to cover our obligation for out-of-district tuition and some additional para-educators that I mentioned earlier in the slide that I showed you. Transportation is the cost that it takes us to transport children to and from the various programs. We currently have two major transportation contracts. We have Durham Bus Services, the bigger yellow buses that you see that transport the majority of our students. But we also have a contract with ECS. They primarily provide transportation for our students with special needs. The Durham Bus Service contract is going up 7%. Our ECS contract is going up 5%. In order to also accommodate programming for this year, we are also needing to add 4 additional buses to what we have in the current fleet. So if you add all of those together, we're looking at a total of $1.2 million in additional transportation expenses this year. There is a nationwide driver shortage, not just for school buses, but also transportation in general. So many of our transportation companies now are offering bonuses and incentives to recruit bus drivers. They pass that cost to school districts. And therefore, this 1.2 million does include those bonuses that these buses are providing. Marianne, is that a signal? We are excited that we're opening a new school in South Norwalk. With that, there are some costs that come with that we are included in this budget that were not included part of last year. With the new school, we have been adding a grade each year. This year, we're adding a 3rd grade classroom. To accommodate the 3rd grade classroom, we're estimating additional 3 teachers and an additional 3 para-educators to accommodate that school. This is a new space that we haven't had before. So with this building, we anticipate additional custodial services, additional cleaning services, utilities, all the things that it takes to run a building. So between the additional staff, about $450,000 and the building portion of it, about another $450,000, it's about $0.9 million for this school. And then finally, our food services contract. We actually went out for bid this year. We only had one bidder participate, and so we're moving forward with that. But we are estimating an additional $700,000 or so to provide support for our food services contract. So with that, this is what our recommended budget as approved by the Board of Ed, the 9.7%. This shows you, breaks it down in the various buckets that we categorize our expenses. But overall, as I mentioned before, within this budget, 75%, almost 3/4 of the budget is personnel and benefits. The rest are your contractual, like the things that have the transportation, the utilities, are the non-personnel areas of the budget that we include. And then finally, as I close up, I do want to talk about the schools. There's been conversation about how can the schools remain whole, which is a challenge. And so this is an example of an elementary school in the district using last year's budget. So this particular school, their local budget is $5.9 million. 77% of this school budget is salaries. 20% of this school's budget is benefits, the health insurance you just talked about. So this particular school, 97% of their budget are salaries and benefits. Only 3%, 186,000 are the non-personnel pieces of the budget. So when you start talking about making reductions to a school budget, after you've made deductions to the non-school budgets, you're really limited in terms of what you can do. And so options become extremely challenging. Again, this particular school has 369 students. You do have class size guidelines, and therefore you have a number of sections you need to have, the number of teachers you need to have. So again, you're all again limited in what you can do. And for this particular school, they have 77 employees, but that's what it takes to run the school. And so when you start looking at how can you impact this, this budget becomes a real challenge. And again, my final slide, I see people taking screenshots. We do have a dedicated page on our website where all of this information lives. That is the QR code. We also have a budget book that we've put together. It's a 90-page book that provides a lot more detail than what I shared with you. It includes an introduction. It includes overview of the drivers. We provide object level detail within that book, including a 4-year history. We include 4-year staffing history, both on the local side and the grant side. We include the staffing history by location. So if there is a particular department, you have an interest in analyzing their staffing trends, that is available in this book for a 4-year period. And we also show that by individual position types. So teachers, paraeducators, CFOs, you can kind of see how many have been trending over the years. And with that, again, I thank you for your time. I know this is a lot of information, but I leave it back to you, Chairman Burnett and Chairman Pritchett.
Thank you, Mr. Asmani, for that very detailed presentation. At this time, we'll open it up for members of the Finance Committee if they have any questions or comments that they would like to make as it relates to the presentations that you've seen or any other items related to the operating budget. Any comments or questions? Councilmember Johan Lopez.
Thank you, Chair. Lovely, quick question. The consolidation of the 21 central office rows, was that part of the figures that we were presented with in the last joint meeting between the board and the council? Or was this more of a recent?
That is recent. That was not included. That was part of the 9.7% that the board approved.
Oh, but at that time, it wasn't part of it.
No.
Okay.
It wasn't.
Councilmember Jim Frank.
Yeah. For both of you, the question, could you give us an idea of what the budget and the actual was last year or this year coming, what you're expected, and then what you had last year? In other words, your budget was X number of dollars. What was your actual spend? And I think if there was, and some of that, if there was extra, that gets rolled over into the next year. So from both sides, from the city side and from the B of E. And then also, what is your projection for this year as to how we're going to come out based on the current budget that we're following?
So I can tell you on the city side, our revised budget for 24 was 427, almost 428 million. And the actual expenditures were about 418 million. You know, this year is a little.
And they combined?
That's combined. Right?
Sorry,
That-
yes, yeah, that's
includes
the total, that's the total. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the revised for the city was 200.1 million. And the actual for 24 was 191 million.
Okay. And
And for 25, so right now we're at 206 million, 206.3 million. Difficult to say. It's still kind of early, where we think we're going to end up. Collections are looking pretty good. Property tax collections are looking good. And I think of other, I think it would probably be premature to talk right now about where I think we're gonna end up, because it's still pretty early.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. But I mean, there's nothing, no anomalies that you're seeing from the city side, no anomalies that you're seeing that are gonna dramatically affect the budget that's in place.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Not
Yeah,
that you wanna think.
nothing dramatic. I don't, Tom, our budget director.
I was just gonna say, so our actual to date are favorable at this point, but keep in mind, we don't have any salary increases from July 1st. So at some point when the contracts are settled, we're gonna have to go back and make retro payments to July 1st, which will bring the actuals up. So anybody who's attempting to extrapolate actuals at this point in the year for the end, be cautious of that.
Jim, for the Board of Ed side, for fiscal year 2024, our total actual spend was 226.5 million. Last year, I believe we only carried over $60,000 from that, so we spent almost all of the budget. Part of the challenge last year was, if you recall, when the budget was approved, we did not fully fund special education at what the actual contractual amount was. So what we were doing throughout the year were any unspent funds were appropriated towards special education. So we ended with just about $60,000 is what we carried over this year. For fiscal year 25, we anticipate similar, because we again underfunded special education and we're funding it by way of transfers into the special education fund. And so our year to date is consistent. I think we're gonna end up pretty much with the approved budget that we have for this fiscal year.
Okay. I have another question is, how much does the city contribute on behalf of the Board of Ed? This is something that we looked at in the past. So we're looking at the Board of Ed expenses, and like last year was what, 225, or I believe it was something like that. And a portion of that was assumed by the city. How much, do you have any idea how much that was? How much that was in the budget last year that was really assumed paid on behalf of the Board of Ed by the city?
I can get you the exact number. I know we're required to report this to the state every year. And so the amount that, doesn't show up on the papers in the budget, I'm going to say it's somewhere between 25 and $30 million, just to give you a range, but I can get you a more precise number. Most of that is the city covers all of debt service on any of our capital projects, and so that is attributed to the city's budget. And so a big chunk of the amount that the city pays on behalf of the schools is for debt service.
Okay. And one final question, and I think this is more for you, Jared, is that can you talk a little bit about the impact of our fund balance, the size of our fund balance in relationship to the rating agencies and how they look at that? And because somebody, I think, mentioned something, well, we've got a great big fund balance and it's raining out there now, we've got to take it. So I think it's important that people understand that the credit rating of the city, how much it's going to cost us to borrow, how much it's going to cost us to fund different projects. We just can't dip into that fund balance. So could you talk a little bit about how credit rating, outfits look at that?
Sure. A lot of times we want to look at these different factors like fund balance and be able to say, well, if we reduce that, what's that going to do to our credit rating? And unfortunately, there are a lot of those factors, and so it's not possible to take one and isolate it and to say, okay, if we take X millions of dollars out of our fund balance, our bond rating would be reduced. There are just too many factors to be able to say for sure what would happen. What we can say is that we do in the reports from the rating agencies, this is something that comes up pretty much every report where and 20% seems like a lot to us. The rating agencies work throughout the country. They're looking at other municipalities, other states, and they look at their fund balances. Our fund balance compared to others nationwide is lower, and they're constantly, the rating agencies are constantly citing that in their reports and asking us to continue to add to the fund balance. And so when you look at our fund balance compared to other Connecticut cities, we're probably on the higher side compared to them, but the rating agencies are, they're looking at both, but they definitely do comment on where we stand compared to other municipalities in other states throughout the country.
So compared to Connecticut and maybe some other city, the municipalities that are of similar size to us, our fund balance might appear to be high. But on the other hand, they're being a lot more conservative and saying maybe it should be even higher.
Yes, yes. And the other thing that, I kind of touched on it in my, I think it was my first slide. We have other funds kind of similar to that where we're reserving money, the insurance, the internal service fund, the insurance fund that I mentioned. That one is down, was down last year. I expect it to be down again this year pretty significantly because we were trying to, the city was trying to stave off some of the effects of the tax increase for this year. So we expect that to, again, fall off and it's not that fund, the internal service fund is not as specifically looked at compared to our overall fund balance, but it's something that we have to take into consideration because we always want to be sure that the net position of that fund is positive. And that we have the cash in that fund to be able to pay those bills for health insurance, for workers' compensation, for our any legal settlements that hit the city. And so we are concerned about that and not letting that dip too low.
One more question, then I'll shut up. And that was in relation to I almost by now I think I've forgotten what I was going to say, but it has to do with the.
I have a question.
Okay,
While you go, think about it. Jared, if you would, several of the emails I got today and yesterday recommend taking, because we have an $87 million fund balance. And the 9.7 would represent 22 million. Just take the 22 million out of the fund balance. Could you explain, because what happens with the MBR, we have a minimum budget requirement that if we took that 22 million out of the fund balance, what would happen next year?
So I'll say, Lunda might be able to talk more specifically about MBR, but I will say that with regard to taking any money out of there, or if we are reducing money that goes into the internal service fund, our insurance fund. We're kicking the can down the road. So if, you know, I don't want anyone to think that if we, you know, if we contribute whatever number of dollars from the rainy day fund, our fund balance, and if that were to be contributed and used to help the, whether it's the Board of Education or the city, it's not a permanent solution. Those costs, it's a one-time revenue infusion, and those costs are going to continue to be there in the following year. So it gets us through this next year, but it doesn't solve the problem. There needs to be some structural changes, I think on both sides in order to make permanent fixes. And that's kind of that's a gloomy way to look at it. I'll give you a more positive and upbeat explanation, which is that, you know, fortunately, at some point, we're going to have to do another revaluation. And at that point, our hope anyway is that the commercial properties or values are going to catch up with the residential, and we'll be able to get back on a steady path. But we need to do some things to get us through these next 3 years.
I do now remember what I wanted to ask, because you just brought it up.
Okay, Councilmember Johan Lopez has a question. We'll come back.
Jared, just a quick follow-up on the residential side, real estate. How much of a mitigating impact do you expect new developments to have on the tax burden? And if you know approximately the tax contribution from higher, more luxury apartments, mid-tier, to those that are economical or considered affordable?
Yeah, so this is what our assessor is going through right now, and we're supposed to be reporting at the end of this month. And so he's specifically looking at some of the larger commercial developments to get an update on where those stand, because we have the ability to look at those in part, so that if the construction on a certain development is 80% done, we can recognize that 80% and tax those properties at that rate. So that's going on right now. We'll have a better sense of that at the end of the month when all of that work is completed. I guess the one thing I can say generally about that is that we won't see any kind of wholesale move from residential to commercial as a result of this. Even though some of those developments are large as individual developments in the grand scheme of things, and the grand related to the grand list, they're a fraction. There's a very small part of the grand list. So you're not going to see, you know, a massive move from residential to commercial. We're hoping that we could see something like that during the next revaluation, but again, that's a 3 years over there. So that's what we know at this point in time.
I could ask some questions. You've got some questions. So just to pull on the thread a little bit more with the rainy day fund, I know we're engaged in some conversation here. So as the mayor indicated, it's nearly $90 million, which is about 20% of the city budget and 37% of the BOE budget. So instead of a budgeted drawdown that often increases the fund balance at the end of the year, would the city consider a realistic budgeted drawdown that would lead to an actual reduction of?
I can answer that. We're working on that now. That's in discussion every day with my chief of staff.
And I have one comment to make before I have my other members ask some questions. There's a lot of talk about MLLs and how we educate them. And I don't know if people know this, but we are required by law. It's the law that we educate every student who comes here, no matter where they're from or what language they speak. It's the law. I just wanted to say that. Did you guys have any questions?
With a follow-up to what Sherry just said, we are a community of, we encourage and we welcome diversity. So there's a lot of decisions, tough decisions that being made. So my question is how does the city plan to support the objective of educating every single child in Norwalk?
I can provide something I've been thinking about. Thank you for that question. I know that, like, from my point of view, in my capacity, I understand that there's a somewhat of like a challenge up at Hartford to try to find a compromise between the fiscal rules that were put into place in 2017 to stabilize state finances, which came at the expense of essential services, right? So what I can do, and I'm more than happy to work with any parent, resident, school, is to help advocate, move the conversation forward to see what we can do to be supportive in a positive way, because obviously, state funding is crucial to any school that's self-funded.
If I can just comment, I mean, that's a difficult question to address because the city allocates an overall amount to the Board of Education, and you're specifically asking, what is the city going to do to address the MLL population? That's not under our control. We give a bottom line amount of money to the Board of Education. It's the Board of Education's responsibility to then allocate those funds. If you choose to give more money towards MLL students, that's your responsibility and the task that you take on. We can't tell you, we're going to give you X amount of money and we want you to spend it on these students. That's not our role. We're not allowed to do that.
That is correct. However, we as the city have our doors open to other families. And there's also the misconception that the Board of Ed is not going to Hartford, that the Board of Ed is not, trying to get the fundings, but we do across the board. We don't just say we're going to give it to the MLL or we're going to give it to SPED, or we're just going to put it in sports. We try to be very, very open, transparent, and equal for everyone. The thing is, we are welcoming families into Norwalk, and it could be very different avenues. It could be saying, we are open to help you move here. We are creating more housing. We are doing everything for people to be attracted to Norwalk. But the Board of Ed cannot do it on its own. So my question is, do you guys have any plans or ideas that can help with the funding of education?
Well, I would say, again, when you specifically say education, we can't control that. In terms of the services that the city provides to all residents, we have invested millions of dollars into our community services department. We've created the Family Navigator program. We are constantly looking at innovative ways to welcome all residents to Norwalk and make Norwalk attractive to all residents. So that is constantly on our radar screen. The Community Services Department has grown leaps and bounds over the last few years, providing several services to all residents. So that's an area that we continue to invest in because we realize the impact that it can have on Norwalk residents, a positive impact.
So that kind of leads to the question that I had, which is, I know that we as a board share a lot of information, a lot of data. We spend a lot of time in meetings looking at data and information. So I'm curious to understand how the city utilizes all the information that we as a board present to you to prioritize and make appropriation decisions on our behalf. And also just following up on what Diana said, again, like, what are your plans to try to help, in assisting making the right appropriation for the
This is an annual process. Each year, we look at the situation and have to make adjustments based on what Board of Ed is telling us based on what we have. We can't project saying, 10 years from now, how many people we're gonna have. It's not scientific. So what we have to do is take a look at each year, the budget that the Board of Ed prepares, and look at what the city has, look at the tax base. It's not an easy, like I said, budgeting is not scientific. Budgeting is at best a kind of the best guess you can make based on what and we look at demographics. How many students do you have this year? How many are MLL? How many are ELL, English language learners? So we have to take all that into consideration. But to say right now, what do you do 5 years from now? There's a lot of interest in Norwalk now, a lot of development going on. But if you look at all the development going on and you look at the number of students, it's not that much of an increase. And because those apartments are not bringing in students. So those are the kinds of things we look at. Each year we have to take a step and work together and see what your situation is, what our situation is. And as Greg was saying, we allocate a certain amount of money. That money then goes to the Board of Ed and we have no say in how it's spent, which is okay.
Well, of course, but I'd be curious to hear from some council members in terms of like what your processes are, when we had meetings like this, like what does it look like for you guys? Because we've approved our budget, like we know where we stand, we voted unanimously on our budget and we're gonna stand by it. So if you could help shed a little bit of light on what your process is from here.
Can I just respond to Ms. Carpio's comments and like that? We're all here because we love the people of Norwalk, and I think we're all pretty welcoming. And you asked what our role is and what we take our role to be. For me, and I think I know these guys pretty well at this point. Our role is to make sure that we have the most impact and the most impactful impact for as many students as possible. So yes, if you come to me and say, I want a book that's $50, I would think, okay, could we buy 10 books for 10 students instead of that one book for that one? So a lot of it's more just really trying to be fiscally responsible and asking the questions about how we're spending money and if it's having the best impact for the most students. So it's not a yes, we like this or no, we don't. I think we all want to do the best for all of our students. It's just how we get there and what kind of questions we can ask to make sure that we're being responsible. And I have one question about this, if I could just digress from that. The numbers are pretty flat, right? We have the same amount of students given
About
the charts.
each year, there's about
Yeah, but they have,
11,500.
but they've got different needs though. We
I
have
know,
about
I
the
know,
same.
I know. But that was my starting point. So we had an increase in transportation costs of 10%. I know I'm interested in transportation to some degree. Where are those costs? Like since it's kind of the same amount of children, what are we able to do for each individual children with an additional 10%?
Thank you. I think I can answer that. And Ms. Fayos is in the back as well if you need additional comment. As I mentioned, the biggest driver of that is the contract, right? So we have a base contract. Even if you don't add the number of buses, the cost increases year after year. We have two big contracts. One is with Durham Bus Services and one is with ESS Bus Services. I'm going to get the two confused, but one of those contracts is going up 5% and one of those contracts is going up 7%. So that's a big chunk of that drop. I also mentioned that we're adding 4 additional buses just because of the programming within the schools. I think it's 2 type 1 buses and 2 type 2 buses. That's kind of in the weeds. But in any event, we're adding 4 additional buses to the fleet in addition to that. So those are some of the things that are driving that buses. Because you could have the same number of students, the exact same number of buses, but your cost would go up next year regardless. So that's what's happening.
My question is more like, are they after school buses or are they for specific schools to school? Where are we seeing?
It's a combination, school to school. Some are special education, some are regular education. The morning, preschool, after school, getting to school and getting home from school.
And my other question, my last question, given that the number of students in Norwalk is pretty flat. We haven't increased it significantly now. We are adding teachers, which there's been some talk about increasing class size. And I know I'm a special education teacher at Norwalk High School. I know that you do need a smaller class size, the more high needs students are, right? So the class sizes should go down actually, right?
Well, it
If the-
depends
if
what
the number of
services you're
students stay
trying
the
to
same.
provide, right? So one of the things that we've been doing across the district is bringing special education services in-house. And in doing so, you have to add personnel. And is Rob here? Yeah. So Rob can speak in even into greater detail the number of programs we've had to add across the district. And every year, these programs, in some cases, are adding a grade. And in doing so, we have to bring in the personnel to provide those services. So we're saving in outplacement costs, a significant amount of money. But in that process, we're still building programs to support the needs of students. And as a result of that, we've needed to add paraeducators, special education providers to provide those services.
But so like when you're talking about these numbers, I just added them together myself. It'd be good to have actual numbers of overall students, but does this include the outplaced students? It does, no?
The total number.
I'm sorry.
Good evening. Yes, it does include our out-of-district numbers.
So these numbers don't, or they do?
No, they do.
Okay.
They do.
Alright. So if the numbers are flat, and our budget was existing, bringing them in and saving money. Put it together.
I think what they're getting at is the mix of the students are gonna change. So you may have, a higher expense for some more severely challenged kids. And the overall numbers may stay the same, but the mix is gonna be a little bit different.
So I'll give,
And although.
I was gonna give an example. So one of the programs that was developed this year was a new program at Nathan Hale. Have X number of students, those students going to Nathan Hale. We have to provide door-to-door transportation. So that added a bus at Nathan Hale. So that's an example of we added a teacher for that program. We added RBTs and paraeducators, registered behavior technicians. So building out that program, there is a cost to building out that program. I can say without the program, some of those students may have gone out of district, which would have cost substantially more to the district, the city. So there is this, there's a cost to build the program, but there is a potential savings because if they were to go out of district, the cost is substantially more.
So we absolutely, in that case, need to include paraprofessionals, speech and language, OT, PT, that kind of stuff. The additional teachers, though, I would think would resolve, given that the numbers of students are flat, we would have smaller class sizes because of that more high needs requires smaller class sizes. We're
Well,
not
the
actually increasing class sizes, are we? I
For
mean,
the
parents are
student-
concerned about that.
For
that's
the
why.
students that are receiving services, there are size restrictions that we have to abide to as per their IEP. The increase in class sizes that parents are referring to is if we have to make reductions in general education personnel, that would increase class sizes across the district.
Isn't there
So-
a union contract? for class size, though?
But we would be abiding by the contract. In many cases, classes are smaller than what the union contract requires. So in cases where that would be the situation, then we would make accommodations to maximize class sizes to reduce personnel costs.
And I think that's a fear of a lot of parents. I don't know if any parents here, I think it is a big fear. So I think that's one thing that maybe we as council people can help, the Board of Ed can share with our constituents what the union contract is with those numbers, You're not gonna have 50 kids in your class. There are very specific standards. So, I'm just trying to.
But
get
also,
information.
many of the parents don't want classes at capacity either because it minimizes the amount of personal information that families have been accustomed to across the district. I think with special education, we have to abide by federal regulation around that, so we have to maintain the standard as per the IEP recommendation. To your point in terms of enrollment numbers being fairly stable across the district, what needs to be taken into account that although those numbers are stable, the amount of high needs students has progressively increased significantly, and the cost to service those students is significantly higher. And I think that that's part of the misconception. I heard it in some of the public comments earlier that people have. Just because the number has been not constant, but pretty stable, the number of high need students has not been. And the cost to provide services is substantially more. I think also when you look at trends and numbers, even if you go as far back as 2019, what it costs to educate a child in 2019 is not the same what it's costing us today in 2024. And although I'm happy to hear inflation rates have dropped significantly and are pretty stable, there was a period of time in the course of the last 5 years that inflation rates were above 8%. And it's in many ways affected us all personally, because we have felt the impact of that in our personal lives, but it's also impacted schools. And I think people tend to forget that the same trends and rates in which inflation and some of the impacts of the pandemic created in our personal life, it also has had similar impacts in the school system. And the amount of services and supports required to effectively support our students is not the same that it was pre-pandemic. Despite funding being depleted, the need will continue to be there. And we need to find ways in which we can continue to provide those supports for our students because they continue to need them.
Before we move on to any other comments or question, Kara did pose a question that's on the table.
Yeah.
Could you just restate it now?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, so I'm just curious, and we do have a lot of people from the public here who, now that we as a board have voted for the superintendent's budget recommendation of 9.7%, I'm curious to understand as council members and mayor and, you know, Jared, like what does your process look like? And like, how do you take all the information that we've given you, prioritize it, and then make your decision around what you feel comfortable appropriating? What does that process look like for them?
What does the process look like?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like, are you in, is it the finance committee?
I
Is
can
it,
pass it over to.
is it, are you in caucus? Like, I'm just,
I can pass
I'm
that
curious.
over to the CFO because we are still assessing all of the inputs from all of the departments, not just the Board of Education. So
Right, that's
that's where we're at right now. So
Okay.
And I think as the mayor stated, it's a combination of science and art. And, you know, I can't point to one specific data point where we look at it and say, okay, this means we should reduce their increase by 1%. We look at the totality of it. And I think that's our job, is to take what you've adopted and to look at it and to then look at, okay, this is gonna have a major impact on taxpayers. And so we have to take that into account as well. As far as, you know, some of the other data, I think some of that data can be used to, and I'll piggyback on what Johan talked about, to make a case to the state, because a lot of these costs that you're experiencing now, special ed and MFL, a lot of those costs that are driving your budget are because of policies that are put in place by the state. And that could be the level of funding that's provided or other policies that needs to be looked at. I know, and this is frankly, it seems like it's a good year to up the ante for you all to up the ante, because I know that Senate Bill 1 has to do with special education, and which means that's a big priority. And I think to hear the voices of the you know, local boards, yeah, as well as the executives, that would help, and any amount of outreach and communication that you all can do would help in that effort. So it's not just always the city and the Board of Education doing battle to, and duking it out to figure out how much money everybody's getting, but to look at the source of the problem and to, start looking other places because I think, it seems pretty clear that 9.7% is not gonna be the final number. And, I think we're all gonna have to explore other avenues.
No, and I'm really glad that sorry, Alex, that you brought up Senate Bill 1, because it is something that we as a board have been following very closely, and we have other board members here who I know have been reaching out to our legislators in Hartford. There was the meeting in Hartford last year, the 5 biggest cities were number 6, so you guys didn't get invited. But we know that those, largest, biggest 5 cities in the state of Connecticut were really advocating in Hartford for all of us, because we're not the only, city, town, municipality in Connecticut that are facing this, especially on the special education front of things. So that is definitely an area that we've been looking at and working on. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you raised it.
Go ahead.
I think to that point, Jared, we have been actively advocating. I personally, in collaboration with other superintendents across the state, have written to Honorable Jennifer Leeper, who's leading education at the state level, advocating for special education appropriation and excess costs so that they keep top of mind how their decisions are impacting the local level, us at the local level, and that we can continue to burden taxpayers at the local level to support educational needs. And there's a lot of examples across the country of states that appropriate, I'm gonna say more efficiently, so that the responsibility of servicing our student body at all levels is done in a manner that doesn't fall on local taxpayers. So not only are we communicating with them at that level, but also with the commissioner. I'm part of the commissioner's superintendent group. I've been advocating actively at that table as well to ensure that they keep top of mind the importance of thinking about their fiscal structure and how they have to restructure a lot of the ways that they're funding schools at the local level. And the state can be more involved in that process because it's something that I agree needs to change.
And I'd like to add to that. I am on the Connecticut Association Board of Education, which we as a board, as chair, we have won an award for that. And that is Board of Educations across Connecticut, where we sit and we talk and we have conversations. We write letters, we call state representatives. We are so on top of that, but those are things that the public doesn't see, because if we were to put out every single meeting that we go to, because we do it in individual groups, we would have to write just a 90-page book just daily of everything that we do. Like Kara said, even board members individually go out there and support. I do it as a group with the chairs of other Board of Education. Dr. Estrella does it with superintendents. So we are definitely out there and we are trying to get the funding. And we also have a grant department that unfortunately grants aren't out there now. Where before they were able to research, apply, was very competitive and get extra money. But those all that grant money has dried up, but they're still looking. So we are definitely fighting for as much as we can. I've got a final comment.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. We're constantly talking to our state delegation. If it wasn't for Senator Duff, we'd be in a lot worse situation than we are now. Hartford looks at Norwalk as being the Gold Coast. Oh, we have our property values. We have a $14 billion brand list. Oh, they can tax people. That's kind of the mindset of Hartford. And unfortunately, as Dr. Estrella said, the Mayor Elicker from New Haven called a group of mayors together and superintendents, and he called the top 5 cities in the state. We're number 6. They didn't even invite us. But, you know, when people see, okay, the mayor's up there, the superintendent's up there, whereas Mayor Rilling, where's Superintendent Estrella? You know, if you don't know about a meeting, you can't go to it. Well, we are constantly fighting and asking for money, looking for money where we can get it any place. The worst taxation in the world is taxing properties. I mean, because you just can't go on taxing properties forever. Eventually, it's going to be unsustainable and people are not going to be able to stay in the city of Norwalk or any other city for that matter. So.
So my final question, how and what can the city assist the Board of Ed in effectively communicating the importance of education funding to taxpayers to ensure continued public support? Heather, I think you might have mentioned something about that earlier. I just wanted to kind of pull on that a little bit more and see if there's any other ideas or comments that you guys can make to that end.
Yeah, I honestly don't think that anybody on the council, we all think that we're all on the same team, that we would want to spend as much money as we possibly can on the Board of Ed. However, as the mayor mentioned, we've got to be realistic about this and how much money can we tax our citizens? How can we maintain the city that we have? You know, we have the same pressures. I think it's not the Board of Education that's got all this pressure on it. The departments in the city have a lot of pressure on them too. And so I think we want to just work as hard as we can with everybody. As Johan said, if we have to go to the state, fine, we're ready to go to the state on behalf. But we can't go to your budget, and it's not our responsibility to go to your budget and say, on this line, we can help you here, we can help you there. In general, we can advocate for more funds at the state level. We can, and the BET will go through every budget in every department in gruesome detail. And having been on the Board of Estimate Taxation for a couple of years, I became the most hated person in City Hall because I kept asking a lot of questions. And I probably asked a couple of questions of Linda and Dr. Estrella as well. But, you know, the Common Council is on your side. Don't look at us as an adversary at all. We want to find the best way we can do it. If there's innovative ways of doing things, you know, if there's some way we can consolidate departments or something like along those lines, it's something that we can explore, maybe and have some conversations about that. But it's not us against you. It's all of us together.
There's
And
also
we
other
have, and we
pieces of
have,
it.
and we have, after the budget process, had very open discussions about how beyond the budget, how the city could assist in providing funding for one-time type of activities. And the city has been able to identify funding to close the gap as much as we could. And we'll continue to have those discussions, but at this point, we can't make those commitments.
And I think there's something I would like to recommend just on that point, and I think I said this to the mayor earlier. Maybe we want to consider having this meeting at a different point in time during the budget process for next year, as we think about the work forward, because it would make more sense maybe for us to have this conversation when there's more clarity on the city side in terms of where the budget stands by department. Because it's hard, right? For us, our process starts earlier. We have a better sense of where we stand. The city probably, I think it's like mid-February that you guys will have a better sense of where you are with the budget process. Maybe it makes more sense for us to have this conversation after that point so that we can have a better understanding of what some of the challenges are for you in terms of the work that you have to do. And you will have already a known our challenges and where we stand. Because it's hard to have this conversation where there's still not clarity on one side of the table, right? And I don't disagree, we're in this together, and we need to work together. I think we did a really effective job last year of working together and figuring things out. And I thank the mayor for his advocacy in getting us additional funding. We had a lot more flexibilities last year that we unfortunately don't have this year. And that's why I think the board, as well as myself and the rest of the team, are highly concerned, because every percentage point means approximately $2.4 million, and that's $2.4 million of people that we will not have in front of children or supporting services for children. Because we're in the business, like 85% of our budget is people. So every reduction we need to make is going to impact people. So that's why we all speak so passionately about the need, because we want to make sure that the people that are currently in front of children continue to be in front of children, because our kids need it. But we also understand some of the challenges that the city has, given how much revenue you can possibly bring to the table to really talk about. But I think moving forward, we have to maybe reconsider when we time this meeting so that we can have a more thorough conversation of what to do next.
Chairman, can I address the board member? So my role is essentially, I'm an elected official, right? So I have to approach this the same way that I approach my work in the development world. I look at a budget, I have to be impartial, dispassionate, I have to be able to make decisions that are going to optimize the well-being of everyone. Students are my constituents. Their parents are my constituents. You're my constituents. So I have to find a way to ask questions to be able to understand to be able to be a lot more supportive. But money is finite. And that's why I brought up the whole issue that's going up at the state. It's this compromise between that they're trying to settle. So that's my role, right? So I want the best for the kids, because I was a student that went undiagnosed with a plethora of things for many years. But that's essentially my role. I want to make that clear to you.
Thank you. And there's also pieces of it too that you guys probably don't have the benefit of. There's also, as much as there's exciting things happening at Board of Ed, which we all support, there's also things within the city like sidewalks. And again, there's a finite amount of money, and would our money be better spent fixing the sidewalks that kids are walking to school on, fixing the lights that they're standing under in the dark at the school bus stop? That's all a push and pull that we see that the Board of Ed doesn't, it's a puzzle piece for us to put together. That's, you're part of it too. So we're trying to balance all that. It's not a black and white for us. Right?
Everybody sits at a different balcony, right? And like looking at the work, that's why everybody has to come together.
I don't want people to go away with fear and thinking that,
And the process doesn't end here. The city takes each department and we go through with the BET, we go through each line from every single department, whether it's salaries, overtime, they need clothes, they need, what's their fuel cost this year? And we make decisions based on that. And once we get that done, the Board of Ed usually you come in and advocate for certain things. And we try to take that into consideration. I think, if you look at the past years, we've probably advocated more for the board money than we do for the other departments. Like I said, right now, I've told my staff come in between 2.5 and 3%. And that's that includes pay raises that their people are going to get. And I said, if you don't come in at 2.5 to 3%, if you're not going to cut and tell us where you want to cut, then we'll cut it. And you may not like what we're cutting, but we try to get the city side down as much as possible. And like we're talking about, there are contracts. I think there's 4 or 5 contracts coming up, or that expired July 1st. And now we're negotiating. Well, we did have some money put away to handle that. So.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Just one last thing. I think one of the speakers brought up the need to reassess some of these non-essential, I think they use the word luxury items. That's something that the board will take a look at?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to, I said this.
And we did. I mean, when we put these budgets together, it's not without that. I mean, I think even if you look at within the budget book, we have the object level detail. I think I counted, we have 100 lines of objects. And I think attendance at meetings is like number 83 out of 100. So I think even just a simple sort by object will tell you where the priorities are. And that's already embedded in this budget. I mean, there's no way we would consider reductions to staff or programs without having looked at some of those things.
That's a signal.
And also aligning it to a strategic priority, right? Because that guides our work. People talked earlier about communication, for instance, but when we started our strategic plan, communication was one of the biggest concerns for families. And we had to build systems because what we had was not effective. And when we had the efficiency study, we were understaffed as it was. And we were getting rid of 14 positions that the district needs. But we know we have to make concessions because we don't disagree that there's only a finite amount of money out there. But we also want to be careful that whatever we do doesn't dismantle the system to the point that it stops functioning effectively. Because for the past several years now, we've had graduation rate on a rise. That wasn't the case a few years ago. And we want to maintain that stamina of progress because that's also going to impact how people want to come to our city, property value, et cetera, right? That's why I said earlier, the city is as great as the progress of our children, right? And we want to make sure that our children continue to thrive.
And this doesn't end here. It doesn't end when we put together our budget, you put together yours, and we come to an agreement. Because we constantly have discussions. Dr. Estrella comes to me and says, oh, we have a problem here. Can we get $500,000? We've done that. We've done that. So it's a constant ongoing process. It's not just, this is it,
And if you increase taxes 20% for every homeowner, we have a lot of landlords. I mean, they're gonna pass it on to renters. And there's a lot of the families of my students that are not gonna be able to absorb a 20% rent increase. Just there's that piece of it too.
Can I say one last thing around efficiencies? I don't know if it was who said it, but somebody was asking about, you were talking about joining potential departments and we're already doing that. Like Lamont and I partner all the time and we bridge services and we bridge support. Even with the family center and the navigators, they are supporting the family center and supporting our families. And we do that in collaboration, even with youth services. We are constantly working together. Sandra and the facilities team alongside the cities, we build a lot of efficiencies together to reduce costs. So, and I say this all the time, like behind the scenes, there's a lot of collaboration that happens between the city and the district to build efficiencies that the public doesn't always see. And I think it's important to bring that to the forefront because we engage in an efficiency review and we took that efficiency study really seriously. And we've been actively working with city departments to build better ways of doing the work for the betterment, not only of the school and our kids, but the city at large.
Dr. Estrella and I go to lunch once a month to discuss these kinds of things. She picks my pocket every time.
On that note of collaboration. We thank the public for taking your time and participating and sharing your thoughts. Those that are watching online and also that shared their thoughts. Again, as the mayor stated, this is not the last meeting. There'll be continuous meetings and dialogue and discussion. But we have to start somewhere. So again, we thank you for your input. And on the topic of collaboration, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
I can't make it.
No, Councilmember Johan Lopez. Thank you. We stay adjourned at 8:28 PM.